Is fiber necessary or overhyped for having a healthy body? We are told of the benefits of colon cancer reduction, increased bowel movements, lowering cholesterol, feeding our microbiome, but what's actually true when it comes to fiber? Well, first of all, let's talk about the types of fiber. There are two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. Soluble fiber actually makes a gel when it combines with water. This promotes the feeling of fullness, it slows down digestion, and it does seem to have some great benefits. Insoluble fiber does not really break down. It's practically indigestible even by our microbiome, and it's really gritty and rough. It increases the speed of digestion. That will become important as we continue to discuss this. Now, bran is a specific type of insoluble fiber that's actually a byproduct of the milling process of different grains. It's basically a waste product that's now become a high profit margin product that's really a marketing gimmick to make you consume more bran. That science has actually found that there's no benefit in reducing colon cancer, in improving IBS symptoms, improving cholesterol levels. It actually causes increased excretion of minerals and nutrients because of that rapid digestion from the insoluble fibers. So if we look at the history of where this whole fiber story came from, it really began with a scientist in the 1950s who was looking at tribes in Uganda and found that they were eating off the land. So they were eating a lot of plant-based foods and they had really low levels of colon cancers and they had pretty frequent bowel movements. And from that, he extrapolated that the low cancer rates and the increased bowel movements were due to this high fiber diet. But what he didn't account for is that these tribes were literally living off the land. They were not consuming processed grains. They were not eating bran. They were very active and they have completely different microbiomes. Now, of course, they didn't really know about that in the 50s. So of course he couldn't have accounted for that. But there's a lot of other factors that go into why they have these low rates of cancer and more frequent bowel movements. But that doesn't necessarily translate to all populations. Now, some studies have shown a limited benefit from higher fiber diets, but there's some critics that look at the study designs that showed the benefits and pointed out that they really might be suffering from what's referred to as the halo effect, which means you get a benefit, but it's not necessarily because of the intervention. It could be because the people who eat higher fiber diets also tend to work out more, not smoke, eat a lot more, whole foods. There could be a lot of other confounding factors that make that true, and it's really not about the fiber necessarily. So I want to highlight two specific studies that specifically looked at fiber intake and particular diseases. The first study was published in the journal Cancer Epidemiology, Biomarkers and Prevention. And this study was specifically looking at polyps and adenomas of the colon. They followed 1,905 people for 4 years on a low-fat, high vegetable, high fruit, high fiber diet. And after 4 years, in comparison to the control group that didn't make any modifications to their diet, absolutely no benefit was found. They didn't have any improvement in polyp numbers or any improvement in adenomas. So no benefit at all. So then they thought, well, okay, maybe 4 years on this diet isn't long enough. So they followed a subset of them for another 4 years. So it was 1,900 people initially. Now they're following just under 1,200 of those same people for another 4 years, following the same intervention, although not quite as strictly. So they did increase their fat a little bit and they did decrease their fiber intake a little bit, but still way better than the control group. So still much lower in fat and higher in fiber than the control group. And after 4 more years, so a total of 8 years of following this intervention, no change. no benefit in polyps or adenomas. The second study was published in the journal World Gastroenterology. They looked at 63 patients with constipation. Now they did evaluate the constipation to make sure that it wasn't, tumor related or surgical related or bowel obstruction or some disease process. This was just your regular everyday constipation, but they suffered with chronic constipation. And they were evaluating the fiber content and how much that could help or hinder the constipation. So they had every one of these 63 people for 2 weeks have no fiber at all, just to kind of baseline everybody. Then they allowed all of the participants to either go no fiber, continued, low fiber, or high fiber. And what they found was in the people who opted for the high fiber, they were on average having a bowel movement 1 every 6.83 days. And after this intervention of continuing the high fiber diet, no change. 100% of them reported bloating, and when they did go, they had to strain in order to pass the feces. Now, the low fiber group were, prior to the study, they were having a bowel movement every 4.18 days. And after transitioning to the low fiber diet, they improved to 1.9 days. So they were having twice as many bowel movements than before. About 31% of them reported still having bloating, and 43% reported that they did have some straining. Now, in the no fiber group, literally eating 0 fiber, on average before the study, they were having a bowel movement every 3.75 days. And after this study of no fiber for a period of time, they went to having a bowel movement every day. And 0% reported bloating or straining. So these 2 studies alone, plus some of the others, indicate that not only does increasing the fiber intake not really provide any benefit, but it can actually make things worse.